The water treatment plant had been offline for 11 months when I took the job. That's the first thing I want to make clear because it matters. 11 months. No water flowing through the system. No chemical processes running. No filtration pumps. Cycling. The county had decommissioned the facility after a new plant opened 14 miles east, closer to the interstate, and all that remained was the building itself, a sprawling concrete structure on 40 acres of fenced land at the end of Grover Mill Road, about 9 miles outside of Hardin, Kentucky. The county still owned the property. They hadn't decided what to do with it yet. In the meantime, someone had to watch it. That someone, for 3 nights a week, was me. I'd been out of steady work for about 5 months before I saw the listing. I'd been doing gig deliveries and the occasional day labor call from a temp agency in Bowling Green, but nothing consistent. My truck needed a new alternator. I was 2 months behind on the payment for the trailer I was renting for my cousin's ex-wife. I wasn't in a position to be selective. The listing was on a county jobs board, posted under Facility Monitor, overnight. And it paid $16 an hour for a 12-hour shift, 10 p.m. to 10 a.m. No experience required. No certifications. Just a background check and a valid driver's license. I applied on a Tuesday afternoon and got a call back on Wednesday morning. The man who hired me was named Dale Pressler. He worked for the county's facilities management office and spoke with the particular flatness of someone who had explained the same things to too many people, too many times. He told me the building still had power because the county was maintaining it as a potential emergency backup site. He told me the perimeter fence was chain link with razor wire and that the front gate had a keypad code. He told me I would be the only person on site during my shifts, that there was no daytime guard because there was nothing to guard during the day. The place was visible from the road and nobody bothered with it. Nights were different. The county had dealt with copper thieves twice in the past year, and once with a group of teenagers who had broken in through a side window and spray painted the walls of the pump room. My job was to sit in the control room, monitor the closed-circuit camera system, and call the sheriff's office if I saw anything unusual on the property. Dale walked me through the facility on a Thursday afternoon, 4 days before my first shift. The building was larger than it looked from the road. The main structure was a 2-story block of poured concrete, almost windowless except for a row of narrow slits near the roof line. Inside, it was divided into a series of connected rooms and corridors. The main pump hall, the chemical storage wing, the filtration gallery, the electrical room, and the control room where I would spend my nights. There were also 2 lower levels. The first sub-level contained the pipe gallery, a long corridor flanked by massive steel pipes that ran the length of the building. The second sub-level was the settling basin chamber, which Dale told me I never needed to visit. He said this matter-of-factly. He didn't elaborate. He just said the stairs going down to it were at the far end of the pipe gallery behind a steel door that should remain closed, and that there was no camera coverage down there because there was nothing to monitor. The control room was on the second floor, accessible by a metal staircase from the main hall. It was a rectangular space, about 20 feet by 15, with a long console desk built into one wall. Above the desk were 9 monitors arranged in a 3x3 grid, each connected to a different camera around the facility. The monitors were old, thick CRT screens with slightly green-tinted displays, but they worked. Below the monitors, there was a small switching panel that let me toggle between camera feeds if I wanted to view a particular area in full screen, There was also a desk phone, a logbook, a space heater, and a mini fridge that Dale said I was welcome to use. The cameras themselves were mounted in fixed positions throughout the building and on the exterior. I wrote them down during the walkthrough because Dale rattled them off quickly, and I didn't want to forget. Camera 1 covered the front gate and the main entrance. Camera 2 showed the parking area and the east side of the building. Camera 3 was the main pump hall, a wide shot from a high corner. Camera 4 showed the chemical storage corridor. Camera 5 was the filtration gallery. Camera 6 was the electrical room. Camera 7 was the north exterior facing the tree line and the back fence. Camera 8 covered the pipe gallery on sub-level 1. Camera 9 was aimed at the hallway outside the control room door, essentially a view of the top of the staircase. Dale showed me how to use the switching panel, how to adjust the brightness on individual monitors, and how to log entries in the book. The logbook was a standard composition notebook, the black and white marbled kind. Inside, I found sparse entries from whoever had held the position before me. Most were nothing. No activity. All clear. Saw a deer near the north fence at 0300, that sort of thing. The last entry was dated almost 3 weeks before my walkthrough. Dale didn't mention why there was a gap. I didn't ask. I needed the job. The only other thing Dale gave me was a laminated card about the size of an index card, which he said had been left by the previous monitor. He called it a quick reference for the camera system. He said it wasn't official county documentation, just something the last person had written up to help themselves stay organized during long shifts. He handed it to me like it was a cafeteria menu. I looked at it during the drive home. It was handwritten in neat block letters, the kind of precise printing that suggested someone who was either very organized or very anxious. At the top it said, Shift Notes, Cameras. Below that were 7 numbered items. The first one said, between midnight and 4 a.m., do not leave camera 8 on full screen for more than 5 consecutive minutes. Switch to another feed and return to it. This keeps the system from overheating. The second said, camera 3 may occasionally show a faint reflection on the pump hall floor, especially between 1 and 3 a.m. This is light from the emergency exit sign refracting off the wet concrete. It is normal. Do not log it. The third said, if camera 7 loses signal for more than 30 seconds, switch to camera 2 and check the east exterior. If camera 2 is also out, call the sheriff's non-emergency line immediately. Do not go outside to check. The fourth said, camera 6, the electrical room, will sometimes display a brief vertical rolling pattern. This is an issue with the cable connection. Tap the side of the monitor firmly once. It should correct. The fifth said, do not rewind or review recorded footage from camera 5 between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. The playback system sometimes introduces visual artifacts during those hours, and reviewing them can corrupt the buffer for the live feed. If you see something unusual on camera 5 during those hours, note it in the logbook, but do not try to rewind. The sixth said, if the phone in the control room rings after 3 a.m., answer it. It will be the automated check-in system from the county's central monitoring office. If it rings before 3 a.m., do not answer it. There is no reason for anyone to call the control room before the automated check-in. The line sometimes picks up crosstalk from the old internal phone system, and answering it can cause a feedback loop that disables the phone for the rest of the shift. The seventh item was partially scratched out. Someone had written something in the same block letters and then scribbled over it heavily with what looked like the same pen, pressed hard enough to slightly tear the lamination. Beneath the scribble I could make out fragments. The word settling. A number, either 6 or 8. The phrase do not, followed by something illegible, and at the very end, clearly legible, despite the scratching, the word back. I put the card in my glove compartment and drove home. I ate leftover spaghetti. I set my alarm for 8:30 p.m. I went to sleep. My first shift was a Sunday night. I arrived at the facility at 9:40, punched the gate code, parked in the small lot near the main entrance, and walked inside. The building was exactly as Dale had shown me, except it felt different at night. During the daytime walkthrough, the facility had felt industrial and boring, like a place where people once did a job and no longer needed to. At night, it felt like something else entirely. The fluorescent lights in the corridors were on a reduced circuit. Only every third fixture was active, so the hallways alternated between pools of bluish light and stretches of shadow. The main pump hall was nearly dark, except for the green glow of the emergency exit signs. The hum of the electrical system was louder than I remembered, or maybe it was just more noticeable without daylight and the ambient sound of Dale's voice filling the space. The building made noises, ticking, a faint rhythmic knocking from somewhere in the walls that I assumed was thermal expansion in the pipes. A low vibration I could feel through the soles of my boots when I stood still on the second floor. I settled into the control room. I plugged in the space heater. I put a sandwich and a bottle of water in the mini fridge. I sat down in the office chair, which had a broken armrest on the left side, and I looked at the monitors. All 9 feeds were active. The images were grainy but clear enough. Camera 1 showed the front gate and my truck, its white paint slightly green on the monitor. Camera 2 showed the empty parking area, the chain link fence, a slice of gravel road disappearing into darkness. Camera 3 showed the pump hall from above, vast and still, the rows of decommissioned pumps looking like the vertebrae of some enormous spine. Camera 4 was the chemical storage corridor, a narrow hallway, lined with metal shelving that held nothing. Camera 5 was the filtration gallery, a room full of rectangular concrete basins, empty and dry, their surfaces cracked in places. Camera 6 showed the electrical room, banks of panels and junction boxes, a few status lights still blinking. Camera 7 was the north exterior, trees, fence, darkness beyond. Camera 8 was the pipe gallery, the sub-level corridor, stretching away from the camera in a long straight line between 2 walls of pipes. Camera 9 showed the hallway outside my door, the top of the metal staircase, the railing. Everything was still. Everything was as it should be. I opened the logbook and wrote, 10:02 p.m., on site, all cameras operational, no activity. The first few hours passed slowly. I read a paperback I'd brought. I checked the monitors every 10 or 15 minutes, scanning each one left to right, top to bottom, the way I imagined a real security professional might. Nothing moved. The building hummed. The space heater clicked on and off. Around 11:30, I heard a sound from somewhere below me, a single, heavy thud, like something falling or a door closing under its own weight. I checked the monitors. Camera 3 showed the pump hall, empty. Camera 8 showed the pipe gallery, empty, nothing on any feed. I wrote it in the logbook. 11:34 p.m. Single loud noise from lower level. Checked all cameras, no visible source. Probable pipe contraction or settling. I moved on. At midnight, I remembered the laminated card. I took it out and reread the first item. Do not leave camera 8 on full screen for more than 5 consecutive minutes between midnight and 4 a.m. I hadn't been using full screen at all. I'd been watching all 9 feeds at once on the grid, so this didn't seem relevant yet. But I kept the card propped against the base of monitor 5 where I could see it. At 12:15, I noticed the reflection the card had mentioned. On camera 3, the pump hall, there was a faint smear of greenish light on the floor near the center of the frame. It was dim and diffuse, exactly like what you'd expect from an exit sign bouncing off smooth concrete. It hadn't been there earlier, or maybe I hadn't noticed. I looked at it for a moment, then remembered item 2 on the card. Light from the emergency exit sign refracting off the wet concrete. It is normal. Do not log it. So I didn't. But the word wet caught my attention. The concrete shouldn't have been wet. The plant had been offline for 11 months. There was no water in the system. I stared at the green smear on the monitor for a while, trying to decide if the floor actually looked wet or if the camera's resolution was too low to tell. I couldn't determine anything. The image was too grainy. I told myself the previous monitor had probably written the card when the plant was still being decommissioned, when there might have been residual moisture. The card was a relic. The explanation was outdated, but the phenomenon was the same, just light catching the floor at an angle. I let it go. At 1:10 a.m., I made my first round through the building. This wasn't required. Dale had told me I could stay in the control room the entire shift, but I was restless and wanted to stretch. I brought my flashlight and walked the main level. The pump hall was cavernous and cold, my footsteps echoing off the concrete in a way that made it sound like someone was walking a half-second behind me. The chemical storage corridor smelled faintly of chlorine, a ghost of the building's former purpose. The filtration gallery was the most unsettling room, all those empty basins like open graves arranged in precise rows. I walked through it quickly. Everything was locked. Everything was still. I returned to the control room and sat back down. The monitors were unchanged, but something about camera 8 caught my eye. The pipe gallery feed looked slightly different. The corridor was the same, long, straight, flanked by pipes, but the quality of the image seemed degraded, more static, finer grain. I couldn't tell if the camera had shifted or if I was just noticing details I'd overlooked before. I toggled camera 8 to full screen to get a better look. The pipe gallery stretched away from the camera in a vanishing point, the two walls of pipes converging toward a dark rectangle at the far end, the door to the stairwell that led down to the settling basin chamber. The door was closed. The corridor was empty. The image was grainy but stable. I watched it for about a minute, then remembered the card. 5-minute limit on full screen for camera 8. I switched it back to the grid. At 1:40, I heard another sound. Not a thud this time. A tone. A faint, sustained hum that was different from the electrical system's baseline noise. It was higher in pitch, almost like a note being held on a pipe organ, and it seemed to be coming from below the floor. It lasted about 10 seconds, then faded. I checked the monitors. Nothing. I checked camera 8. The pipe gallery was empty, the door at the far end still closed. I wrote in the logbook, 1:41 a.m., brief audible tone from sub-level area, unknown source. No visual anomaly on cameras. I stared at what I'd written and felt, for the first time that night, a faint unease that was different from simple boredom or jumpiness. It was the feeling of being in a large building, alone, in the dark, and realizing that the building had sounds you didn't understand. 2 a.m. came. I was careful not to rewind camera 5. I hadn't seen anything unusual on it anyway. The filtration gallery was as empty and still as it had been all night. The restriction on the card seemed overly cautious. Probably the kind of thing a bored night monitor would write to make the job feel more structured. I understood the impulse. When your job is to watch nothing happen for 12 hours, you start creating rituals and protocols to give the time shape. At 2:20, I noticed something on camera 7, the north exterior. The camera faced the tree line, and the image was mostly darkness. The sodium light on that side of the building cast a weak orange cone that reached maybe 30 feet before dissolving into black. Beyond the light, the trees were just suggestions of vertical shapes. What I noticed was movement in the trees. Not dramatic movement, not a figure or an animal, just a section of the canopy, maybe 40 or 50 yards from the fence, that seemed to be swaying in a pattern that didn't match the rest. The wind that night was light, maybe 5 miles an hour, and the other trees were barely moving. But this cluster of branches, near the top of what looked like a large oak, was swaying rhythmically back and forth like something heavy was rocking in the upper limbs. I watched it for several minutes. The movement continued, steady and regular like a metronome. Then it stopped. The branches went still and matched the rest of the tree line. I looked away for a moment to write a note in the logbook, and when I looked back, everything on camera 7 was normal. I couldn't explain it. Wind shear, maybe. Some localized gust that didn't affect the surrounding trees. It wasn't impossible. I'd seen dust devils form in open fields for no apparent reason. Air does strange things. I wrote it down and moved on. At 2:50, the phone rang. The sound was jarring, a loud mechanical ring, the old-fashioned kind, like a bell being struck inside the handset. I jerked in my chair and stared at it. The phone was a beige desk model with a coiled cord, the kind you'd find in an office from the mid-90s. It rang 3 times before I remembered the card. Item 6. If the phone rings after 3 a.m., answer it. Automated check-in. If it rings before 3 a.m., do not answer it. Crosstalk from the old internal system. It was 2:50. Before 3, I did not answer it. The phone rang 9 times. I counted. Each ring was identical. Same volume, same duration, same interval. After the 9th ring, it stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the silence before. I sat very still and listened to the building. The electrical hum, the space heater clicking, the faint ambient presence of a structure full of empty rooms and dormant machinery. I made a decision in that moment that I would follow the card exactly. Every item, I didn't fully understand why. The logical part of me knew the card was just the notes of a previous employee, probably someone who had been doing the job longer than me and had figured out the quirks of an aging monitoring system. There was nothing supernatural about crosstalk on a phone line or a camera buffer that corrupted during playback. These were mundane technical issues dressed up in the language of rules, because that's how people process information when they're alone at night in a place like this. But some other part of me, some older instinct that didn't traffic in logic, said follow the card. So I did. The automated check-in call came at 3:05. The phone rang and I answered it. A recorded voice, female, flat, synthetic, said, "This is the Franklin County Facilities monitoring check-in. If this facility is currently staffed, please press 1. I pressed 1. The voice said, "Thank you. Check-in logged at 03:05. Your next check-in window is 0600. The line went dead. I hung up. Everything was exactly as described. I felt a small, irrational relief, as if passing a test I didn't know I was taking. The hours between 3 and 5 were the quietest. Nothing moved on the monitors. No sounds from the building. The green smear on camera 3 was still there, faint and unchanging. Camera 8 showed the pipe gallery empty and still. I toggled it to full screen twice during this window, watching for 3 or 4 minutes each time before switching back, careful to stay under 5 minutes. I didn't know what I was watching for. The corridor looked the same every time. Pipes, concrete, the dark rectangle of the closed door at the far end. At 4:15, I noticed something in the logbook that I hadn't seen during my initial flip-through. Several pages before the first entry I'd read, there was a page where someone had pressed hard with a pen but hadn't written words. They'd drawn lines. Not random scribbles, deliberate measured lines, like a rough floor plan or a diagram. I tilted the book under the desk lamp and tried to make sense of it. It looked like a rectangle with smaller rectangles inside it, connected by lines. Below the diagram, in very small handwriting, different from the block letters of the other entries, more hurried and slanted, someone had written, "It follows the water, even when there is no water." That was all. No date, no name, no context. I stared at it for a long time. The sentence didn't make grammatical sense in a way that suggested a clear meaning, and yet it produced in me a reaction that was entirely physical. A tightening across my shoulders, a coolness at the back of my neck, as if the temperature in the room had dropped by a single degree. I closed the logbook. I checked the monitors. I sat in the chair and waited for my shift to end. The 6 a.m. check-in came on time. Same recorded voice, same procedure. I pressed 1. Check-in logged. The hours between 6 and 10 passed without incident. Dawn came slowly through the narrow slits near the roofline, turning the corridors from blue-black to gray. The building felt different in the early morning, still empty, still humming, but defanged somehow, like a stage after the audience has left. I packed up my things, logged my final entry, 10:00 a.m., shift complete, no significant activity, and drove home. I slept until 6 in the evening, ate, and spent the night watching television and not thinking about the plant. My next shift was Tuesday. Tuesday night was different from the start, though I couldn't have told you why in the first hour. The building felt the same. The monitors were the same. The hum, the lights, the empty corridors on the feeds, all identical to Sunday. But I was different. I was watching more carefully. I was listening with more attention. The laminated card was already propped against monitor 5 when I sat down, and I found myself glancing at it every few minutes, as if confirming that the words hadn't changed. At 11:20, the green smear appeared on camera 3. Same position, same diffuse glow. I watched it longer this time. 5 minutes, 10. The light didn't move, but something about its edges seemed to shift, as if the illuminated area on the floor was slowly expanding, like water pooling outward from a source. I blinked and looked away, then looked back. The smear was the same size. I told myself I was creating patterns from static. That's what low-resolution cameras do to the human brain. They give you just enough visual information to trigger your pattern recognition instincts and not enough to satisfy them. So your mind fills in the gaps with whatever it's primed to see. I was primed for strangeness. I was seeing strangeness. It meant nothing. At 12:40, I toggled camera 8 to full screen. The pipe gallery appeared, identical to every other time I'd viewed it. Pipes, concrete floor, the long corridor tapering to the dark door at the end. I watched it. At the 2-minute mark, I noticed something I hadn't seen before. On the left wall, about halfway down the corridor, there was a mark. It was small. At the camera's resolution, it could have been anything. A stain, a shadow, a scratch in the concrete. But I didn't remember it from Sunday. I studied it for another minute, trying to determine if it had depth or if it was flat against the wall. The image was too grainy. At 4 minutes and 30 seconds, I switched back to the grid. 15 minutes later, I toggled camera 8 to full screen again. The mark was gone, or it had never been there, or it was there, and the angle of the camera's fixed position created a shadow that sometimes appeared and sometimes didn't, depending on conditions I couldn't perceive from the control room. Any of these explanations was possible. None of them was satisfying. At 1:15, the tone came back. The same sustained hum from sub-level, the same pitch, the same duration, about 10 seconds. I sat motionless and listened to it fade. Then, about 30 seconds after it stopped, it came again. Another 10 seconds. Then silence. Then, a minute later, again. 3 occurrences in quick succession, each identical, each separated by a gap that seemed almost deliberate, like a signal being sent at intervals. I checked camera 8. The pipe gallery was empty. The door at the far end was closed. Everything was exactly as it had been, but the tone was coming from somewhere below that corridor. From the settling basin chamber that Dale had told me I never needed to visit, the same chamber referenced in the scratched-out 7th item on the laminated card. I sat there with the logbook open, pen in hand, and debated whether to write down what I'd heard. I wrote it down. 1:17 a.m. Recurring subsonic tone from sub-level 2. 3 occurrences approx. 60-90 seconds apart. Duration katialta and 10 seki each. No visual anomaly. I did not go down to investigate. I want to be clear about that. I'm not a curious person by nature, and I'm not brave. I'm someone who needed $16 an hour and had a broken alternator and 2 months of back rent. My job was to sit in the control room and watch the monitors. That's what I did. At 2:08, something happened on camera 5 that tested my commitment to the card's instructions. The filtration gallery feed, which had been a static image of empty basins for the entire night, showed movement, brief at the far edge of the frame, near the doorway that connected the gallery to the main pump hall. It was a shift in the shadows, not a figure, not a shape I could identify, but a change. As if something had moved through the doorway and the camera had caught only the disturbance it left in its wake, the way you might see curtains sway after someone has passed through a room. The movement lasted less than 2 seconds. Then the feed was still again. I wanted to rewind. The impulse was immediate and strong. Whatever had moved, it had been at the very edge of the frame. And a few seconds of rewound footage might show me what it was. A rat, a bird that had gotten inside, a trick of the camera's aging sensor. Something explicable, something I could write in the logbook and forget. But the card said no. Do not rewind or review recorded footage from camera 5 between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. The playback system sometimes introduces visual artifacts during those hours. I looked at the clock on the wall. 2:09. I was inside the restricted window. I did not rewind. I watched camera 5 live for the next 20 minutes. Nothing else moved. The filtration gallery was as empty and still as a photograph. I switched my attention to the other feeds, scanning each one methodically. Camera 1, front gate, my truck, darkness. Camera 2, parking area, fence, gravel. Camera 3, pump hall, green smear on the floor. Camera 4, chemical corridor, empty shelves. Camera 6, electrical room, blinking lights. Camera 7, north exterior, trees, fence, nothing moving. Camera 8, pipe gallery. Camera 9, hallway outside my door. I stopped on camera 9. I don't know why. There was nothing on it. It showed the top of the metal staircase, the railing, the hallway stretching away from the control room door toward the main corridor. Fluorescent light every third fixture. Pools of blue, stretches of dark. Nothing was there. But I looked at it for a long time. Longer than I'd looked at any single feed all night. And I felt something I can only describe as the sensation of being looked at in return. Not through the camera, from the hallway, from the other side of the door to my left. I turned my head and looked at the door. It was closed. There was no window in it. I had closed it when I entered the control room at the start of my shift, and I had not opened it since. There was no sound from the hallway, no footsteps, no breathing, no presence that I could detect with any sense other than the one that was telling me with absolute certainty that something was standing on the other side of that door. I sat without moving for what felt like minutes, but was probably 30 seconds. Then I looked at camera 9 again. The hallway was empty. Whatever I had felt was either gone or had never been there. I picked up the pen and then set it down. I didn't write this in the logbook. I didn't know how to describe it in a way that wouldn't sound insane, and I was afraid that, putting it into words would make it more real than I wanted it to be. The rest of that shift was uneventful. The 3 a.m. call came. The 6 a.m. call came. Dawn crept through the slits. I left at 10 and drove home with the radio on. Loud, tuned to a country station that was playing something upbeat about summer and cold beer. I showered and lay in bed and stared at the ceiling of my trailer and told myself that old buildings are strange at night and that solitude does things to perception and that I was fine. I believed about 70% of it. My third shift that week was Thursday. I almost didn't go. I sat in my truck in the parking lot of my trailer park for 10 minutes before pulling out, running the math on whether I could afford to lose the hours. I couldn't. I drove to the plant. Thursday was the night things changed. The first 6 hours were quiet. Quieter than either previous shift. No thuds, no tones, no movement on any camera. The green smear on camera 3 appeared on schedule around 11:30, and I ignored it as instructed. I toggled camera 8 on and off at careful intervals. The pipe gallery was empty. The mark on the left wall was not visible. I read my book. I ate my sandwich. I drank water. The building hummed. The heater clicked. At 2:30, the phone rang. I looked at the clock. 2:30? Before 3. I did not answer. It rang and rang. I counted the rings this time with deliberate focus, each one identical, each one filling the control room with that sharp, mechanical bell tone. It rang 12 times, then it stopped. 15 seconds later, it rang again. 12 rings, silence. Then again, 12 rings. This happened 4 times. 4 sets of 12 rings, each set separated by exactly 15 seconds of silence. I sat with my hands on the desk and my eyes on the phone, and I did not pick it up. After the 4th set, the ringing stopped and did not resume. The silence was vast. At 2:55, I heard something that was not the tone. It came from below, from the sublevels, but it was not the sustained hum I had heard before. It was a sound like metal being dragged across concrete. Slow, deliberate, long. It lasted perhaps 5 seconds, then stopped. Then it came again, from a slightly different direction, as if the source had moved. Then again, each time the sound was a little louder, a little closer. Not closer to the control room, I don't think, closer to the camera, closer to the pipe gallery. I watched camera 8 on the grid. The corridor was empty. The door at the far end was closed. Then it wasn't. At 3:02, While I was watching the grid, the door at the far end of the pipe gallery on camera 8 opened, not all the way. It moved inward into the stairwell behind it, maybe 10 or 12 inches, enough to create a gap of pure darkness where the door had been flush with the wall. I saw it happen in real time. The door had been closed, and then it moved, and then it was open. There was no one visible on the feed. Nothing in the corridor, nothing in the doorway. Just the door ajar and the darkness beyond it. I switched camera 8 to full screen. The image filled the monitor. The pipe gallery, the converging walls of pipes, the concrete floor, the door at the far end. Open now, showing only black. I watched. The 5-minute timer started in my head. At 30 seconds, nothing had changed. At 1 minute, nothing. At 2 minutes, I thought I saw something in the dark gap of the doorway, a variation in the blackness, a shape that was slightly different in texture from the surrounding dark, as if something was standing just inside the stairwell, not yet in the corridor, just barely visible at the threshold. I leaned forward in my chair, trying to resolve the image. The monitor's grain was too heavy. I couldn't tell if I was seeing a shape or inventing one. At 3 minutes and 40 seconds, I switched back to the grid. I sat back in my chair. I looked at the other monitors, forcing my eyes to move across each feed in sequence, giving my brain something else to process. Camera 1, gate, truck. Camera 2, lot, fence. Camera 3, pump hall, green smear on the floor, slightly larger than before. Or the same size, I couldn't tell. Camera 4, corridor, shelves. Camera 5, filtration gallery, empty. Camera 6, electrical room. Camera 7, north exterior. On camera 7, the trees were swaying again. The same cluster of branches, the same rhythmic motion, back and forth, steady as a pendulum. But this time other trees nearby were also moving, as if the disturbance was spreading outward from the original point. I watched the motion ripple through the canopy in a slow, expanding circle, moving toward the fence. There was no wind. I had stepped outside briefly when I arrived, and the air had been dead calm. Whatever was moving those trees was not wind. I looked back at camera 8. The pipe gallery was empty. The door at the far end was closed. I stared at it. I was certain, absolutely certain, that 60 seconds ago, that door had been open. I had seen it open. I had watched the gap of darkness. And now it was closed, as if it had never moved. I did not rewind. I did not go down to check. I sat in the control room and looked at the monitors and the laminated card and the logbook, and I breathed slowly and deliberately, and I waited for my shift to end. The 3:05 automated check-in had not come. I realized this at 3:18. The phone had not rung since the 4 sets of 12 at 2:30. No automated voice, no check-in, no instruction to press 1. Just silence. I picked up the receiver and listened for a dial tone. There was one, thin, distant, but present. The phone line was working. The call simply hadn't come. At 3:22, the phone rang, 1 ring. I answered it before I could think. It was after 3. The card said to answer after 3. 1 ring was enough to trigger my hand. There was no automated voice. The line was open. I could hear the faint hiss of an active connection, but no one spoke. No recording played. No check-in prompt. I held the receiver to my ear and listened. The hiss was layered, like 2 or 3 signals stacked on top of each other, each carrying a slightly different texture of static. Beneath the static, I thought I heard something. Not a voice, not words, a sound like breathing, but not human breathing, too regular, too mechanical, too even, like the rhythm of a pump cycling. or like something imitating the sound of breathing by using the vocabulary of the building itself. I hung up. I stared at the phone. I looked at the monitors. Nothing had changed. Nothing was different. The building hummed. The heater clicked. The pipe gallery on camera 8 was empty. Door closed. Corridor vacant. At 3:45, I opened the logbook to write down what had happened, and I found a new entry. I need to explain why this was impossible. I had the logbook with me the entire shift. It had been on the desk within arm's reach. Since 10 p.m., I had written in it at the start of the shift and had not opened it since. No one else was in the building. No one had entered the control room. The door had been closed all night. And yet, on the page after my last entry, in handwriting that was not mine, small, slanted, hurried, the same handwriting as the diagram in the sentence about water, there was a new line. It said, "She is in the basin. She has always been in the basin." I read it 3 times. The ink was fresh, dark, wet-looking, slightly smudged, as if it had been written moments ago. I touched the page with my fingertip. The ink didn't transfer. It was dry, but it looked fresh. I turned the page. Blank? I flipped back. The entry was still there. I had not written it. I had not seen anyone write it. And yet there it was, in the logbook, on the desk, in the control room where I had been sitting alone for nearly 6 hours. I closed the book. I stood up. I put on my jacket. I picked up my keys and my flashlight and the laminated card, and I walked to the door of the control room, and I opened it, and I stepped into the hallway. I did not look at camera 9 to see myself leave. I did not look at any of the monitors. I walked down the metal staircase, my boots ringing on each step, the sound echoing through the main hall. I crossed the pump hall floor, passing beneath the camera that I knew was recording me. A small figure moving through a vast, empty space. I walked to the main entrance, pushed through the double doors, and stepped outside into the cool air of a Kentucky night in early March. The parking lot was empty except for my truck. The sodium lights hummed their orange frequency. The stars were clear. The trees along the north fence were absolutely still. I got in my truck and drove to the gate. I punched the code. The gate opened. I drove through it and did not look back at the building in my rearview mirror. I drove straight to my trailer, went inside, locked the door, and sat on the edge of my bed with the laminated card in my hands, turning it over and over. The 7th item, the scratched out one. I held it under the bedside lamp and tilted it at every angle I could manage beneath the heavy scribbling, using the shadows cast by the indentations in the lamination. I could make out more than I had before. The full text, or something close to it, seemed to read, "If you hear anything from the settling basin level, do not open the door at the end of the pipe gallery. Do not go down. Something came up through the drain system and it has not gone back." I set the card on my nightstand. I did not sleep. I watched the ceiling turn from black to gray to pale morning white. I did not go back for my next shift. I did not call Dale Pressler. I did not call the county. I let 2 days pass, then 3, then a week. My phone rang twice from an unfamiliar number with a county prefix, and I let it go to voicemail. The messages were from Dale. The first was polite, asking if I was all right and reminding me that I needed to notify the office if I couldn't make a shift. The second was less polite, informing me that if I did not report for my next scheduled shift, my employment would be terminated. I did not return either call. 3 weeks later, I was back doing gig deliveries. A month after that, I got a job stocking shelves at a building supply store in Bowling Green. Night shift, 11 to 7. The pay was less than the plant job, but the store had people in it, other stalkers, a night manager, the occasional late customer. I was never alone. That mattered to me in a way I couldn't fully explain to anyone who hadn't sat in that control room. I kept the laminated card. I don't know why. I should have thrown it away. It sits in the drawer of my nightstand, under a phone charger and some loose change, and sometimes when I open the drawer, I see it, and I feel that tightening across my shoulders, that single-degree drop in temperature, as if the card itself carries a residue of the place it came from. I have looked up the Grover Mill Road water treatment plant a few times since then. There is very little information about it online. The county's website lists it as an inactive facility under periodic review. No news articles, no incident reports, no mention of the settling basin or the drain system or anything that happened or didn't happen in the 11 months between the plant's decommissioning and my brief employment there. But I did find one thing: a county council meeting agenda from 6 years before the plant was closed. Item 14 on the agenda was titled Discussion, Incident Report, Grover Mill Water Treatment Facility, Employee M. Delacroix. The agenda was a public document posted as a PDF on the county clerk's website. But the actual incident report was not attached. There were no minutes available for that meeting, and the name M. Delacroix did not appear anywhere else in any county document I could find. I think about that name sometimes. I think about the handwriting in the logbook, the small, slanted, hurried letters. I think about the sentence, she is in the basin. She has always been in the basin. I think about the laminated card and who wrote it and why they scratched out the 7th item instead of simply removing it. I think about the door at the end of the pipe gallery, closed and then open and then closed, and the darkness inside the gap when it was open and the texture of that darkness, and whether what I saw at the threshold was a shape or nothing. I think about the phone ringing 12 times at 2:30 in the morning in a building where no one should have been calling. I think about the green smear on the pump hall floor that the card said was a refraction of light off wet concrete in a building where there was no water. I think about the tone from the settling basin level, that sustained hum, repeated at intervals like something calling out in the only language it had. I think about these things and then I stop thinking about them because that is how I get through the day. I go to work, I stock shelves, I come home, I eat, I sleep, I live my life in well-lit rooms and try not to notice the sounds that buildings make when they settle, or the way water moves in the pipes behind the walls, or the particular quality of silence that fills a room at 3 in the morning when the world is asleep. And something, somewhere, in the deepest part of a place you'll never return to is not. The one thing I never resolved, and the one detail that still surfaces, usually when I'm driving alone at night on an empty road, and the radio cuts out between stations and there's just static for a second before the signal returns, is this: the logbook entry. The one that appeared while I was sitting right there. She is in the basin. She has always been in the basin. I know I didn't write it. I know the door was closed. I know I was alone. But the handwriting, the small, slanted, hurried handwriting, I've seen it one other time. When I was cleaning out the glove compartment of my truck a week after I quit, I found a receipt from a gas station in Hardin. On the back of the receipt, in handwriting that matched the logbook exactly, someone had written a single word. The word was my name. I have never been to that gas station. I have never been to Hardin. The receipt was dated the day before my first shift. I don't know how it got into my truck. I don't know who wrote my name on the back of it. I don't know what any of it means. But sometimes late at night when the store is quiet and I'm alone in the lumber aisle with nothing but the hum of the overhead lights and the distant beeping of a forklift backing up, I think I understand something that I can't put into words. Not about the plant or the basin or Monsieur Delacroix or whatever came up through the drain system and did not go back. Something simpler and worse. The understanding that there are places that remember you. That being watched is not always a matter of cameras and monitors and feeds. That some attention, once it finds you, does not stop when you leave the building and drive home and lock your door and turn on every light in the house. I still check my glove compartment every time I get in the truck. It's always empty. But I check. And some mornings when I come home from the night shift and the sky is that particular shade of gray that comes just before the sun breaks, I stand in the doorway of my trailer and listen. Not for anything specific, just listen the way you do when you've learned that silence is not the absence of sound. It's the sound of something choosing not to speak.